I still remember the exact moment when my entire world collapsed in front of everyone I loved. The lights were soft, the music was gentle, and people clapped as my fiancé held my hand. That night was supposed to be about happiness, about promises, about a new chapter. But instead, it became the most humiliating and painful memory of my life. We were standing at the center of the room, surrounded by family, friends, co-workers, neighbors, and even people I barely knew. My fiancé had just made a toast, thanking everyone for being there, when suddenly my father walked closer. At first, I thought he was going to hug me. But then, without warning, his fist landed directly on my face. The crowd gasped. My vision blurred, and in that split second, my heart shattered in ways I never thought possible. The sharp pain in my eye was nothing compared to the burning shame that followed. Everyone was staring at me. My friends, my in-laws, the people who were supposed to admire me in my moment of joy. My first instinct was to cry, to run, to scream. But then I heard my mother's voice cutting through the silence, calm but cruel. "Keep smiling." Her words froze me in place. Keep smiling. After what just happened? My eye throbbed, tears fought to escape, and all I wanted was for the ground to open and swallow me whole. But my mother stood there, staring at me with an expression that mixed coldness and authority. I realized she wasn't asking me. She was ordering me, and I obeyed. That night, my engagement wasn't remembered for the ring, the speeches, or the laughter. It was remembered for the punch, the silence, and the forced smile that still haunts me to this day. My name is Emily. I'm 23 years old, and until that night, I truly believed I had control over my own life. I thought I could balance family expectations, love, and my own dreams. But when your father's fist leaves a bruise on your face and your mother commands you to act like nothing happened, you realize how fragile that control actually is. I grew up believing that family always protects you, that no matter what happens in the outside world, your home is where you find comfort. But what happens when the very people who should be your shelter become the ones who hurt you most? That's what I want to share with you in this story. Not just the punch, not just the humiliation, but the years of silence, tension, and broken boundaries that led to that one devastating moment. Because the truth is, what happened at my engagement didn't start there. It was the result of years of fear, of pretending, of hiding bruises, emotional and sometimes physical, behind fake smiles. And maybe you've been there too. Maybe you've smiled when you wanted to cry. Maybe you've laughed when your heart was breaking. If you have, then you already know how heavy that mask becomes. In the chapters ahead, I'll tell you everything. The fights that no one saw, the moments of hope that kept me holding on, the shocking reactions from people I trusted, and the impossible choice I had to make: continue living under my parents' shadow or finally break free, no matter the cost. So, if you've ever felt trapped between love and fear, if you've ever had to hide your pain just to survive, I ask you to stay with me until the end of this story, because maybe, in my broken engagement, you'll find the strength to face your own truth. I grew up in a house where silence was more dangerous than shouting. Most children remember laughter, bedtime stories, and warmth. I remember footsteps echoing down the hallway at night, and the way my mother's hand would grip my arm just a little too tightly when she wanted me to behave. My father wasn't always violent, but he carried an anger inside him that seemed to wait for the smallest excuse to explode. For years, I thought this was normal. I thought every little girl lived afraid of what her parents might do if she spoke too loudly, cried too much, or asked the wrong question. When I was 6, I learned the art of pretending. Pretending to be happy when I wasn't, pretending I didn't hear the fights behind closed doors, pretending that the bruises my mom sometimes hid were just accidents. She never said it out loud, but I saw it. I saw the way her eyes shifted when someone asked her about a mark on her arm. I saw the way she avoided talking about my dad's temper. And even though she was the one who got hurt, she was the first to warn me, "Never make your father angry. Do you understand?" I nodded, and that became my rule for survival. School was my escape, but even there, I couldn't fully relax. Other kids would talk about vacations, birthday parties, family dinners. I smiled and nodded, But inside, I wondered what it felt like to live in a home where hugs came more often than insults. Teachers sometimes noticed I was quiet, reserved. A few even asked if everything was okay, and I always gave the same answer: yes. Because if I told the truth, I feared it would only make things worse once my parents found out. As I grew older, I became an expert at reading my father's mood. I could tell, just by the way he walked through the front door, if it would be a calm night or a storm. His silence was heavy, pressing against my chest until I could hardly breathe. If he slammed the door too hard, I knew to disappear into my room. If his voice was too low, too controlled, I knew something worse was coming. My mom and I didn't need words. We communicated through looks. A glance from her could mean, stay quiet, don't argue, or just agree with him. By the time I was a teenager, I realized my mother had given up on fighting back. Instead, she became the enforcer of his rules. She told me how to dress, how to speak, how to act so that he wouldn't get upset. I resented her for it, but deep down, I knew she was scared too. Sometimes, after one of his outbursts, I'd hear her crying alone in the kitchen. I wanted to comfort her, but I was just a kid, powerless against the man who controlled everything. The worst part was that outside of our home, people adored him. He was charming, generous, even funny. Nobody would believe me if I said what he was really like. I clung to small moments of freedom whenever I could find them. Staying late at school, hanging out with friends, even just sitting in the library felt like breathing fresh air. But those moments always ended with me returning home, where the tension waited like a shadow. I dreamed of turning 18 and leaving, of finally building a life where fear wasn't the background noise of every day. Still, a part of me held on to hope that maybe, just maybe, my father would change, that my family could be normal. But instead of getting better, things escalated. When I turned 17, he started drinking more. The alcohol sharpened his temper, making the explosions louder and more unpredictable. Once, after I stayed out later than he expected, he grabbed me by the wrist so hard that I had a bruise for weeks. I remember looking at my mom, waiting for her to say something, to defend me, but she just looked away. That was the night I realized she wasn't just powerless, she was complicit. Her silence told me everything I needed to know. I started dating my fiancé, Mark, when I was 19. For the first time, I felt what it meant to be cared for without fear. He listened to me, made me laugh, and never once raised his voice in anger. Being with him was like stepping into a different world, one where love wasn't conditional, where affection wasn't earned by obedience. I tried to keep him away from my family, afraid they'd ruin the one good thing I had. But eventually, he wanted to meet them. And that's when the cracks in my carefully built mask began to show. Introducing Mark to my parents was like mixing fire and gasoline. My father immediately disliked him. He said Mark was too soft, not man enough. My mother wasn't cruel to his face, but I could feel her judgment in every glance. They wanted me to marry someone they approved of, someone who fit their standards. But I didn't care. For the first time in my life, I wanted to choose something for myself, and I chose Mark. That decision planted the seed of conflict that would grow into the nightmare of my engagement night. Still, in the early days of our relationship, I tried to balance everything, pleasing my parents while protecting my love for Mark. It was exhausting, like living two different lives. I lied about where I was, who I was with, what I was doing. My father demanded control over every detail of my life, and I could feel the tension building every day. Deep down, I knew something was coming. Something big. And as much as I tried to pretend otherwise, I could feel the storm gathering on the horizon. Because the truth is, families like mine don't just change overnight. The pressure builds, the silence deepens, and eventually, everything bursts. I didn't know when it would happen or how, but I knew one day my father's anger would explode in a way I couldn't hide anymore. What I never imagined was that the explosion would come on the very night that was supposed to be the happiest of my life. The night Mark proposed to me was everything I had dreamed of. We were at a small Italian restaurant, candles flickering on the table, and he looked at me with so much love that I almost forgot the weight I carried from home. When he pulled out the ring, my heart nearly burst. I said yes through tears, and for once, my tears weren't from pain, but from pure happiness. In that moment, I let myself believe in a different future, one where love was safe and laughter wasn't followed by tension. But as soon as I told my parents, that fragile happiness began to crack. My father's reaction was immediate and cruel. "You think this boy can take care of you? He's weak," he said with disgust. My mother, always more subtle, told me in private that I was making a mistake and that marriage was about stability, not feelings. They didn't congratulate me, they didn't smile, and they didn't ask to see the ring. Instead, they began a campaign of control, asking invasive questions about Mark's family, his job, his plans. Every time I defended him, their disapproval grew sharper, like knives pressed against my skin. Mark noticed the tension, but tried to be patient. "They'll come around," he told me, always hopeful. But I knew better. My parents didn't come around. They imposed, they commanded, they demanded obedience. And deep down, I feared their rejection wasn't just about Mark. It was about me daring to make a choice they hadn't approved. My father saw my independence as rebellion, and rebellion was something he crushed without mercy. That realization haunted me as we began planning our engagement party. The weeks leading up to the event were suffocating. My mother insisted on controlling every detail: the guest list, the decorations, even the food. When I suggested including some of Mark's traditions, she shut me down instantly. "This is about family," she said, and by family, she meant her version of it. Mark tried to compromise, offering to step back so my parents wouldn't feel left out. But I could see the disappointment in his eyes. I hated that my joy was being hijacked, that my own engagement felt less like a celebration and more like a battlefield. Still, I told myself it would be worth it. If I could just get through the party, maybe things would calm down. Maybe my parents would see how happy Mark made me. Maybe, for one night, we could all coexist without explosions. That hope was the only thing that kept me going, even as my stomach twisted with anxiety every time I thought about the party. I practiced fake smiles in the mirror, rehearsing how to deflect comments, how to laugh off insults, how to survive. Survival had become second nature to me, even in moments that should have been joyful. The day of the engagement arrived, and my body felt heavy with dread. I put on my dress, styled my hair, and stared at myself in the mirror, trying to convince myself that I looked like a woman about to begin a new chapter of her life. But beneath the makeup, I could see the little girl who had spent years flinching at every loud sound. Mark held my hand before we left, kissed my forehead, and whispered, "We're in this together." I wanted so badly to believe him, but a voice inside me whispered otherwise. "You're still under their control." When we walked into the venue, the atmosphere was warm and lively. Mark's family was already there, smiling, hugging me, making me feel like I belonged. For a moment, I felt light, almost safe. But then I saw my father in the corner of the room, watching me like a hawk. His expression wasn't pride or happiness. It was calculation. My mother stood next to him, her face carefully composed, but her eyes were cold. My chest tightened. I knew then that this night wasn't about celebration. It was a test, and I was the subject. As the evening unfolded, the tension became harder to hide. Mark's parents gave speeches filled with warmth and joy, while mine barely spoke. When they did, it was clipped and forced, as if they were enduring rather than celebrating. My father drank heavily, his glass never empty for long, and each sip seemed to sharpen the anger in his eyes. I avoided him as much as I could, clinging to Mark's side, but deep down I knew avoidance would only delay the inevitable. The storm was coming closer, and I could feel its heat crawling across my skin. At one point, my father cornered me near the bar. His voice was low, but the venom in it was unmistakable. "Do you really think you can just walk away from this family? You think he's stronger than me? Smarter than me? You're still mine." His words pierced through me, and for a moment, I couldn't breathe. I managed to whisper, "I'm not a child anymore," but my voice trembled. His eyes narrowed, and a chilling smile spread across his face. I knew I had made a dangerous mistake by talking back. From that moment on, I could sense the night unraveling. My father's presence became heavier, his steps louder, his eyes darker. Mark noticed my discomfort, gently squeezing my hand, but I couldn't tell him the truth. Not here, not now. The mask I had worn my entire life was slipping, and I fought desperately to keep it in place. Yet no matter how hard I tried, I could feel the cracks widening, leading us all to the moment that would change everything. The speeches had ended, and laughter filled the air, but underneath it all I could feel the walls closing in. My father's stare followed me across the room like a predator circling its prey. My mother was beside him, her smile so practiced that no one else seemed to notice the chill in her eyes. Mark was radiant, holding my hand, thanking everyone for coming, but my heart was pounding so hard that I could barely hear his words. I kept telling myself, just get through this, just survive tonight. But deep down, I knew something was about to snap. When Mark finished his toast, people clapped, glasses clinked, and for a brief second, I allowed myself to believe that maybe the night would end peacefully. I looked at him, my fiancé, my safe place, and I smiled. A real smile, not one I had rehearsed. But before the applause faded, I felt a shadow fall over me. My father stepped forward, his jaw tight, his fists clenched. I froze. I wanted to believe he was going to hug me, to show some shred of approval. Instead, his fist collided with my face so fast that I didn't even have time to react. The pain was immediate and blinding. My vision exploded into stars, and I stumbled backward, barely catching myself. Gasps filled the room, the sound of shock echoing louder than the music. My hand flew to my eye, already throbbing, and tears blurred my vision. I heard someone scream my name, Mark's voice desperate and broken. But all I could focus on was the ringing in my ears and the fire spreading across my face. My engagement party, my supposed night of joy, had turned into a public stage for my father's violence. I wanted to collapse, to let the tears flow, to scream out the truth I had buried for years. But then my mother's voice cut through the chaos like a knife. Calm, steady, almost rehearsed, she said, "Keep smiling." I turned to her in disbelief. My eye burned, my heart ached, and yet she stood there with the cold authority of someone who had long ago surrendered her soul. Her command wasn't a suggestion. It was an order. In that moment, I realized that for her, appearances mattered more than my pain. So I obeyed. I forced my lips to curl into a smile, even as tears streamed down my cheeks. My face must have looked grotesque, one side swollen, my eye already darkening, and yet my mouth stretched in a mask of happiness. The crowd didn't know how to react. Some looked away, uncomfortable. Others whispered to each other, their eyes wide with judgment or pity. Mark was furious, trying to step between me and my father, but my father pushed him aside with a snarl. "This is my daughter," he growled, as if he still owned me. Mark's family was horrified. His mother tried to reach for me, but my mother blocked her with a chilling smile. "She's fine," she said smoothly, as though nothing had happened, as though my blackening eye was just part of the evening's performance. I wanted to scream that I wasn't fine, that I was breaking inside, but the weight of years of silence kept my mouth shut. The room felt like it was spinning, and I clung to Mark's hand like it was the only anchor keeping me from collapsing entirely. The whispers grew louder, the atmosphere fractured. Some guests excused themselves, leaving in awkward silence. Others stayed, their eyes darting between me, my parents, and Mark. It was as though no one knew the script, as though my family's cruelty had finally broken through the illusion they had so carefully maintained. For the first time in my life, my father's violence wasn't hidden behind closed doors. It was exposed, raw, undeniable, and witnessed by dozens of people. And yet, I was still being told to smile. Inside, I was screaming. I wanted to run, to grab Mark's hand and never look back. But my body felt paralyzed, trapped by the same fear that had chained me since childhood. My father stood there, chest heaving, daring anyone to challenge him. My mother kept her mask in place, pretending to control the narrative. And me? I was the shattered centerpiece of their twisted performance. A bride-to-be with a bruised face, a trembling heart, and a smile that didn't belong to her. In that moment, I realized something I had always feared, but never admitted. My parents didn't care about me. Not my happiness, not my safety, not even my future. What they cared about was control, about appearances, about maintaining the image of a perfect family no matter how rotten it was inside. And standing there, with everyone watching, I understood that my life would never change unless I made the choice to break away. The punch wasn't just an act of violence, it was a declaration, a warning, and it left me with one haunting question. Would I finally find the strength to escape, or would I keep smiling until there was nothing left of me? The morning after the engagement party, I woke up with my eyes swollen shut and my heart heavier than ever. The bruising had spread across half my face, purple and blue reminders of what everyone had witnessed. Mark wanted to take me to the hospital, but I begged him not to. "They'll ask questions," I whispered, terrified of exposing the truth. He looked at me like he couldn't recognize the girl lying next to him, a girl so used to hiding pain that even now she was protecting the people who hurt her. The silence between us was unbearable. Mark drove us home in silence, his hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly that his knuckles turned white. I could feel his anger radiating, not at me, but at what had been done. Yet underneath it all, there was also disappointment. He wanted me to stand up, to say something, to break the cycle right there. But I didn't. Instead, I stared out the window, clutching my aching face, and let the weight of my mother's words sink in. "Keep smiling." Those words haunted me, echoing in my head like a cruel mantra. When we arrived at his apartment, Mark sat me down on the couch and touched my face gently. "Emily," he said, his voice trembling, "we can't pretend this didn't happen." His kindness only made me cry harder. I wanted to tell him everything, every secret I had buried for years, but the fear of losing him and angering my parents kept me silent. "Please, just give me time," I begged. He nodded reluctantly, but I could see in his eyes that patience had limits, and we were already standing at the edge of them. The following days felt surreal. News of what happened spread quickly among guests who had attended the party. Some texted me with concern, while others distanced themselves, afraid to get involved. My father acted as though nothing had happened, walking around town with his head high, daring anyone to question him. My mother, on the other hand, doubled down on her narrative. She called relatives and insisted that I had slipped, painting the bruise as an accident. The lies made me sick, but I was too exhausted to fight them. At work, people noticed. Coworkers stared, whispered, and offered awkward sympathy. I told them the story my mother had crafted, forcing a laugh about being clumsy. Every word felt like betrayal, to myself, to Mark, to the truth. Each time I lied, I felt the chains tighten around me, the same chains I had worn my entire life. But breaking them meant facing the storm I had been running from for years, and I wasn't sure I was strong enough yet. Mark, however, wasn't fooled. He saw through the mask, and his frustration grew. One night, Mark cooked dinner for us and finally asked the question I had been avoiding. "Emily, do you really want a future with me if it means keeping them in your life?" His words hung in the air, heavy and unshakable. I put down my fork and stared at him, unable to answer. My heart screamed yes, but my fear screamed louder. Choosing him meant defying my parents, cutting ties, and possibly losing everything I had ever known. Choosing them meant slowly killing myself inside. It felt like an impossible choice. Meanwhile, my mother continued her subtle manipulation. She called me daily, not to ask about my health, but to remind me of family duty. She warned me that leaving would shame everyone, that people would talk, that I'd regret turning against blood. "Marriage is temporary, but family is forever," she told me coldly. Each conversation left me more drained, more confused. I began to wonder if maybe she was right, if maybe love couldn't outweigh the bonds of family, even when those bonds were chains. The mental tug of war consumed me, pulling me apart. Mark's parents, however, were not silent. His mother invited me over and, with tears in her eyes, begged me to protect myself. "Sweetheart, love should never hurt," she said softly, holding my hand. I felt seen, truly seen, in a way my own mother had never allowed. But her kindness also terrified me, because it forced me to confront the reality I had been denying. If strangers could see the truth, how much longer could I keep hiding behind lies? Mark watched me closely, his silence louder than any words. The breaking point came when I received a message from a cousin who had been at the party. "We all saw it, Emily. Don't let them silence you." Her words pierced through my fog of fear and shame. For the first time, I realized I wasn't alone. People knew, people had witnessed, and no amount of my mother's lies could erase what had happened. The truth was out there, undeniable, and it was only a matter of time before I had to face it. I could no longer pretend this bruise was just mine to carry. As I lay in bed that night, staring at the ceiling, I felt the weight of every choice pressing down on me. Stay silent and preserve the illusion, or speak up and risk losing the family I had spent my whole life trying to appease. Mark slept beside me, his hand reaching for mine even in his dreams, a reminder of the life I could have if I found the courage. And in that darkness, I realized that my next step would determine not just my future with him, but the person I would become forever. The bruise eventually faded, but the scar it left on my heart never did. Each morning, when I looked in the mirror, I saw not just the mark of my father's fist, but also the truth I had spent years denying. I was trapped, not by walls or locked doors, but by fear, loyalty, and a lifetime of conditioning. Mark waited patiently, but I could feel his frustration growing with each day that passed. He loved me, but love alone couldn't fight the war raging inside me. One evening, after a tense phone call with my mother, I finally broke down in front of him. "She wants me to apologize to him," I confessed, my voice shaking. Mark's face hardened. "Apologize? Emily, he hit you. In front of everyone. And she stood there and told you to smile." His anger was justified, but it scared me because it mirrored the anger I had spent my whole life avoiding. I buried my face in my hands and whispered, "I don't know how to escape them." For the first time, I admitted out loud that I was trapped. Mark pulled me into his arms, holding me tightly. "You don't need their permission to live your life," he said softly. "You're stronger than you think." His words planted a seed in me, one I didn't know was capable of growing. For so long, I had believed my parents controlled my future, but maybe they only had the power I kept giving them. That thought both terrified and liberated me. Could it really be that simple? To just stop obeying, stop fearing, stop smiling when it hurt? The turning point came when my mother showed up unannounced. She walked into Mark's apartment as though she still owned me. "Pack your things," she demanded coldly. "This little rebellion has gone on long enough." I froze, my hands trembling, but Mark stepped between us. "She's not going anywhere," he said firmly. My mother's eyes narrowed, but she didn't flinch. She turned to me and said the words that nearly broke me. "If you choose him, you're no longer my daughter." My heart stopped. It was the ultimatum I had feared my whole life. That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay awake replaying her words over and over. To lose my family felt like cutting off a piece of myself. But hadn't I already been losing myself for years just to keep them? Was I really their daughter, or just a puppet they controlled? Mark's breathing beside me was steady, grounding me. I thought about the future we dreamed of, our own home, children who would grow up in laughter instead of fear, a love that wasn't poisoned by control. Could I let that slip away just to keep chains disguised as family ties? The next morning, I called my parents and asked to meet them. My hands shook the entire time, but I knew this was a conversation I couldn't avoid any longer. We sat at the kitchen table, the same table where I had spent years obeying in silence. My father leaned back in his chair, arms crossed, waiting for submission. My mother's eyes were sharp, daring me to defy her. I took a deep breath and said the words that had been buried inside me. "I'm not yours to control anymore." My father slammed his fist on the table, the sound echoing through the room, but I didn't flinch this time. My mother scoffed, calling me ungrateful, selfish, blind. They tried every weapon they had, anger, guilt, shame, but something inside me had shifted. For the first time, I wasn't that little girl shrinking under their power. I was a woman standing on her own. "You don't get to decide who I marry or how I live," I said firmly, my voice steady despite the fear twisting in my stomach. The silence that followed was deafening. My father's face was red with rage, but he said nothing. My mother's eyes burned with betrayal, but she didn't stop me. I stood up, my legs trembling, and whispered, "I love you both, but I won't destroy myself to make you proud." Then I walked out, my heart pounding, half expecting them to drag me back. But they didn't. They let me go, Maybe because they didn't believe I meant it. Maybe because they thought I'd crawl back in tears. But I knew I wouldn't. Not this time. When I returned to Mark, I collapsed into his arms and cried. Not from fear, but from release. For the first time in my life, the chains had loosened. I wasn't free yet, not completely, but I had taken the first step. It was terrifying, painful, and uncertain, but it was also the beginning of a new life. As Mark whispered, "I'm so proud of you," I realized that family isn't defined by blood or fear. It's defined by love, respect, and the freedom to be yourself. And though the road ahead would be difficult, I had finally chosen to walk it. When I look back at that night, the night of my engagement, I no longer see it only as the most humiliating and painful moment of my life. Yes, it broke me. Yes, it left scars that I will carry forever. But it also forced me to confront a truth I had been running from since childhood. I could not keep living a life built on silence and fear. That punch was the end of something, but it was also the beginning of something else, a journey toward freedom. Walking away from my parents was not easy. There are nights when I still dream of my mother's voice, cold and commanding. Keep smiling. Sometimes I wake up trembling, as if I am still that little girl forced to obey. Other times, I feel an emptiness inside me, a hollow ache where family should be. But then I remember that love without safety isn't love at all. Family that destroys you isn't family. It's prison. Choosing myself meant breaking the chains, even if it left me standing in the dark for a while. Mark has been by my side through every step of this journey. He has seen me at my weakest, held me when I was drowning in doubt, and reminded me that strength doesn't mean never being afraid. It means moving forward in spite of the fear. Together, we are building something new. It isn't perfect, and it doesn't erase the past, but it is ours. For the first time, I can smile and know that it belongs to me. If you are listening to my story and you recognize yourself in it, I want you to know something. You are not alone. Maybe your scars are different. Maybe your pain wears another face, but the weight of silence feels the same. And silence only serves those who hurt us. Your voice matters. Your life matters. And you deserve a love that does not ask you to suffer in order to exist. I won't pretend that leaving is simple. It takes courage, and sometimes it takes falling apart before you can rebuild. But I promise you this: the freedom on the other side is worth every tear, every step, every terrifying choice. Because in freedom, you find yourself again. You remember who you were meant to be before fear took over, and you finally breathe without waiting for the next explosion. This is not the story of a perfect ending. It's the story of survival, of reclaiming a voice that was silenced for too long. It's about turning pain into strength and refusing to let the past dictate the future. My engagement wasn't remembered for the ring, the music, or the speeches. It was remembered for the bruise, the silence, and the moment I decided never again to keep smiling through pain. And maybe that's what makes it powerful. It became the night that set me free. If my story touched you, if it made you feel less alone, or if it gave you even a spark of courage, I ask you from the bottom of my heart, subscribe to this channel. Not just to support me, but because together we can create a space where stories like mine don't stay hidden in the dark. Where truth is spoken, masks are dropped, and people find strength in each other's voices. Your click, your presence, could be the beginning of someone else's freedom, and maybe even your own.